Okay, guys, here's one that flew below my radar up until now. It is 2014's A Walk Among the Tombstones with Liam Neeson. It has a 67% on the tomato meter and a 53% on the audience score. It has 37,000 plus audience reviews, so it is not a forgotten about film, and yet somehow it just showed up on a cable channel a while back, and I hadn't heard of it before. And apparently, this was released while people were still waiting for the disappointing and rotten Taken 3 to show up. This was made the year before, or at least released the year before that. This one is rotten, not quite as rotten as Taken 3, but I'll agree with the audience score, about 50%, 50 to 53%. That seems fair to me because it just struck me after about 30 minutes of watching this that this probably came from a novel of some kind, and that the director, he made the mistake on keeping it with the multiple POV scenes like the novel was. And I don't know if the novel was an omniscient multi-POV story, but I'm thinking it was, because that's what made this film seem very disjointed and kind of all over the place for me. It didn't stick with any particular character. You might think it would stick with our main character, the former detective or former cop, who is now an unofficial or unlicensed private investigator in New York City. You would think that would be the main character, and that's what I thought going into this, not knowing much about it. Yet it isn't really, because the film kind of takes us to different points of view, and it's very much like a novel would be, in that you're allowed to go through different chapters from different points of view from different characters. And a novel will tie all this up together. It has a lot of leeway. You can go 300, 400, 500 plus pages to make a story like this work. But as a film adaptation, it was just a really bad choice here, because the director just wanted this to do that, to follow along with the novel. And as a result, I didn't know who I was supposed to be putting all my emotional investment in. I didn't understand why I was starting the film off following this lead character around, and then all of a sudden I'm there in the kitchen with the bad guys, seeing them do stuff. And at another part, I was along for the ride with a homeless kid who had his own troubles with the gang, and it was all over the place. And as a book, I think it would have worked just fine, but you can't just bring that style straight up into a film and expect people to have some kind of suspense. And this actually says on Rotten Tomatoes that it's in the genre of action and adventure and drama. Well, there's no action and adventure here. There really isn't. It almost comes across as an attempt to do some type of suspense or thriller or mystery. It does a little of all of those things, but it's a little bit too disconnected, and you're all over the place to get any kind of tension going. And so I don't know who thought this was supposed to be action and adventure, but it is not. And if I had gone into the theater thinking that I was getting an action movie, with Liam Neeson, and I thought this would be another Taken type movie, oh, I would have been pissed off really bad, because there's none of that in this film. And in fact, there's a lot of preaching that goes on in this film, and it's very strange, and we'll get to that. But let's get right into the audience reviews on this 2014 R-rated movie. I'm not going to entertain anything above 3 stars, because this is an episode of Rotten Reviews, and that's what we're here for. So let's move on down. We have a 3-star review from September 25 of 2019, making this about 3 to 4 months old. So still relevant, but it's fading. 3 stars. I see where this film is trying to go, but it goes nowhere. Yeah, I'll agree with that. First off, on the number of stars, no, I'll say this is a 2-star movie. It's not irredeemable, but 2 stars max for me. It just has too many flaws. It's just too failed of an adaptation. This reviewer is saying he sees where it's trying to go, but it goes nowhere. Well, yeah, it pretty much just ends, and the bad guys are defeated, and there's a lot of violence, and The main protagonist isn't exactly a good guy. He's kind of like almost an anti-hero, and he's not redeemed at the end. He's not exactly a good guy at the beginning, and he doesn't become a good guy at the end. Like, he has no transformation. I'm not sure what the point of this was. I felt that there was no point at the end because the credits just started to roll, and I was left going, well, what was the point of this whole thing? So I agree on that, but I'll say 2 stars max. Um, 3 stars, November 4, 2018. Now we've made quite a significant time jump. We're back more than a year now. A hard-to-watch crime thriller that is as morbid and depressing as they come. A Walk Amongst the Tombstones is an intriguing and gripping detective noir that is as gruesome as these types of investigative films get. I wish it were not as derivative of other better movies, but it is certainly suspenseful. No, I'm sorry. I just have to stop there. There's no suspense in this because just when the movie is about to deliver any kind of suspense, it like abruptly shifts you over to another point of view entirely, and it takes all the suspense out of it. It starts off with me wondering who the killers are and what the story is there and what is the mystery there that's going to be solved. And then it just takes me straight to the bad guys and shows me what they are. And I'm thinking, well, wow, that kind of took all the fun and mystery out of it. And every time I thought something was going to be, mysterious and I would get a payoff from figuring out what was going on, the movie just took me to somebody's point of view that just blew it all out into the open and made it kind of irrelevant. So I'm just going to have to say I completely disagree with this reviewer. They're comparing this to like Zodiac and The Lovely Bones, Prisoners. They're saying that those are better detective investigative thrillers. Well, this isn't even an investigative thriller. You think that's what it's going to be at the beginning, but right when you're getting into it, it just like blows that all away and just turns this into something that's just going off on tangents with into subject matters that have, you think there's a big, let's just say there's a big Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program message here of some type. And you start to see this creep into the story with the main character who's definitely in the 12-step AA program, and you think that's going to go somewhere and that's going to fit in with stuff that's going to be revealed in the film, and then it just never does, and it never has a point, and it's just like kind of derailing a lot of what's going on in the story. It doesn't match up with anything going on. It doesn't provide any kind of theme. It's just there to remind you that somebody wants to tell you all about the 12-step program. And this film actually just literally freeze frames itself during action sequences, and just to present to you the number of steps, the 12 steps. It has characters read them out. Step number 6, blah, 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 blah. Step number 7, blah, 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 blah. As this action scene is just having freeze frames, and then we see a lot of Liam Neeson just in pause moments where he has, he has moments during the story where he can kind of lean against a wall somewhere and catch his breath, and then he kind of looks off into the distance, and then yet another voice from an AA meeting reads off yet another one of these 12 steps, step number 10, blah, 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 blah. And then the action continues again, and Liam Neeson goes on to do something else. And you're just left after a while realizing that there's no point to this. It doesn't match anything that's going on in the story. It's just there for some purpose. Somebody in the production of this, maybe the director, wanted to tell us all about the 12 steps, because that's literally what it is. It serves no purpose in the plot. And at other times in the story, this derails and follows the character of a black teenage homeless character who's, I guess, at some point he was involved with a street gang, and he has kind of run away from them, and he's sleeping in the library and other places. And Liam Neeson encounters him in a library while he's doing research for his case, and it's not bad. I mean, it was actually, it kind of added some spice to the story, but then that just derails, and we follow along with this character, and nothing about his backstory, about him having sickle cell anemia or his troubles with the gang, really matches up with anything else going along in the story. It's very disjointed. And, normally when you do these type of things and you try to have multiple POVs on characters, you want them to have like stories that, even if they're not directly connected, the themes inside of them kind of match up and parallel each other. But this movie never does that. It's just got a whole lot of different POV characters that never sync up in any way theme wise. They're just plot points where the plot just literally zigzags all around the place, and it adds up to a whole lot of nothing. So when I read a 3-star review like this, I'm just very confused on why they think it should even be compared to something like Zodiac or Prisoners. I mean, wow. There's none of that in this film. If there was an attempt at it, it completely failed. I was paying attention, and I'm sorry, you just can't compare it to that other stuff. 3 stars, February 16, 2018. A solid thriller with Neeson back to form. There's no thriller here. I'm sorry. It kind of tries to at the beginning, but then it never delivers anything. It's just all over the place with different non-likable kind of criminal characters that could have worked if there was some kind of thriller going on, but there isn't. There's no thrills, there's no mystery, there's just straight up a whole lot of bad and broken people doing things to each other, and it gets very gory and it gets very brutal, and it doesn't really deliver anything for sitting through all of that. I felt like I was seeing a whole lot of violence, but it didn't give me any reward for sitting through all that violence, and I just don't get where these 3, 4, 5-star reviews come from. They've got me completely stumped. But I'll read another one. 3 stars, January 1, 2018. This is 2 years ago now. Liam Neeson must be worth a fortune by now. He really is the go-to guy for this kind of almost straight to Netflix stuff. Well, I'll break in here and say that I thought Liam Neeson's performance was fantastic in this. I thought he was cast perfectly. That wasn't the problem with this movie at all. In fact, I think everybody in this thing was cast just fine. Liam Neeson is the main character. David Harbour is a really psycho type bad guy, serial killer, rapist, etc. Boyd Holbrook is in this as kind of a junkie character. They all did their jobs just fine. They weren't the problem. The problem was the damn script, and the plot was all over the place and disjointed, but I'll continue on. I can see why. Always puts in a good shift and gives even a mediocre role a bit of polish. For me, he occupies a kind of acting hinterland somewhere between Denzel Washington and Pierce Brosnan, the former A-lister who now just turns in a reliable performance. He was, after all, the guy who went toe-to-toe with Ralph Fiennes in Schindler's List, and I can't see Fiennes turning up for, well, wow, this is just a Liam Neeson fanboy. Yes, Liam Neeson's very effective in a role in which he is cast properly. For example, I just did a rotten review on Taken 3, which came out a year after this. He was miscast in that role. He doesn't belong as an action hero. It didn't work. It made the movie really bad. In this, he's cast perfectly. He's an alcoholic former cop who's now an unofficial PI or an unsanctioned PI. He's got definite problems. He's got personality problems. This could have been really great, but it just didn't do anything with his character. But his performance as this type of character was completely perfect and believable. It had me for the first 25, 30 minutes. And then I began to think, well, this is going rotten. And the point that it actually went rotten for me was basically when all of the sudden we go to the point of view of the two bad guy serial killers sitting in their house in the kitchen, and they're kind of like making themselves breakfast. And I'm like, wait a second, what? That's when I knew, wow, that's that moment that I jotted down in my list, and I have quite a list, of when this thing actually turned rotten for me, because before that scene happened, I was wondering why this had only a 53% on the audience score. I was thinking, maybe somehow people have this thing wrong, maybe they weren't paying attention, or maybe something else is going here. But sure enough, when we popped into the kitchen and we see David Harbour and his boyfriend, and they're both sitting there fixing themselves breakfast, and it's shown that they're the serial killers, they're the bad guys. That's when I said, oh, yeah, this is what happened. And it all went downhill from there. It didn't get better. We derailed back to these bad guys. for no purpose because it took all the suspense, all the mystery out of it. And they were just serial killers that somehow had a list of targets that the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, was surveilling. And they were going through these lists of targets of these drug dealers and extorting them, and then just having fun raping and killing their wives that they would take prisoner. It was very bizarre. Like, I didn't get a sense of just who these guys were, how they started doing this, why they were doing it. They were just really disgusting bad guys, serial killers. And that's when I saw them there eating breakfast and talking about, what they were going to do. It just got worse from there. That's when it went rotten from me. Before that scene, I thought, that people were wrong and maybe they just didn't understand this film. But yeah, that's where it went rotten. And I'm going to say, Liam Neeson fanboys, I recognize he did a great job in this, but he's not the problem in this. Everything else is the problem. 3 stars, October 19, 2017. We're back 3 years now, more than 3 years back in time. As far as crime thrillers go, this is a by-the-book film. Typical and predictable plot, but it was very well done and gripping. Liam Neeson puts in one of his best performances and carries the film most of the time. There's little action, but it didn't need much. I had little interest in watching this film, but I found it pretty good after having no expectations for it. It can be slow at times, but if you're a fan of a well-told noir-style thriller, then this film is right up your street. Yeah, but it is not a thriller. It's trying to be one, but it is simply not. If they had cut out like half of those different point of view characters, and they had just, they could still have those characters, but just not have us follow them around as main characters. This thing could have worked, maybe, but when you started following all these different characters around, like a book would do, and a book can get away with that, but the film tried to do that, and it just sucked all the suspense and thriller, any thrill there would have been just got sucked out of this thing. So I completely disagree. I don't know. I guess I guess there's more than one book that this is based upon. About halfway in, I realized that I was looking at something that came from a book, and then I looked it up, and in fact, there's more than one book series with this character. I'm not going to comment on if it's, reliable to the character. It really doesn't matter because as an adaptation, it just failed because you can't do what a book does in that regard and just straight up copy that into a film. It just doesn't work. You get rid of all the suspense, all the mystery. I was just more confused why we were going along with all these different characters. Made no sense. 2 stars, June 30, 2017. A Walk Among the Tombstones wastes a talented cast on a story that we've seen many times with no new twists or turns. Well, yeah, in the book, maybe there were things that were better characterized and it made it seem fresh or different. But in this film, yeah, it just feels like a whole lot of types of things we've seen done a lot better in other films many, many, many times before. This same type of broken ex-cop detective character. This goes back like 60, 70 years now throughout fiction. It's very cliched. Yes, Liam Neeson does a great performance as this type of character, but he's done that before too, by the way. So what? Like, there's nothing new here. And it's just confusing. The plot just doesn't deliver any mystery, suspense, thrill, nothing. 3 stars again. I don't know why, but March 15, 2017. Liam Neeson walks around looking at stuff for the majority of this old school serial killer thriller before entering full-on Taken mode at the end. Yeah, they're kind of right about that. Liam Neeson, he's just kind of, I guess his character's name is Matt. And Matt just walks around almost like we're in some kind of mystery or detective case type story. And he's just visiting locations and trying to get clues. But it's very boring in that regard. It becomes boring after a while because there's no payoff to it. And when it goes into full-on Taken mode, it fails at that. There is some gunplay at the end, but it's just a lot of violence. And there's no payoff to it, and you don't feel that Matt, this character Matt, is in any real danger. You know that he's going to survive to the end, and he acts like that too, that he doesn't care if he survives to the end or not. and it just feels like you're watching all this violence and it doesn't go anywhere and it's not suspenseful. And yeah, it does spend a lot of time trying to mimic what somebody would do in a mystery, a detective story, but it's not real effective because a lot of disconnected scenes, a lot of violence, and a lot of characters that are very bad and broken and nasty, and uh, you just don't feel anything out of it all, except you're wondering why you put up with it if you in fact were able to get through it all. Half a star, February 8, 2017, did not follow the book. Yeah, I'm going to guess that it didn't exactly follow the book, but the director did make the mistake of trying to keep all those points of view, and it definitely failed. 2.5 stars, January 11, 2017. This was yet another film to star an aging Liam Neeson as a vengeful man bent on justice at any cost. This time as a disgraced former cop who works as an unlicensed private investigator. He finds himself hired to look into someone else who's been blackmailing drug traffickers by kidnapping their loved ones and then not returning the people once they have been paid. And it's all sort of engaging but never fully drew me in. Oh well, a rental at best, at least for my tastes. Yeah, this reviewer though is making it sound better than it really is. It's not even that good. It has big problems in it aside from the fact that it doesn't convince you of anything thrilling and suspenseful. Like, let's see what's on my list. Yeah, it's like it's a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous type stuff thrown in there. Like you see this main character going to AA meetings, but yet you don't get anything out of it. I mean, they could have shown us this one time that he went to AA meetings, but we go multiple times back to these AA meetings and they don't give us anything new. We don't learn anything new. There aren't any revelations that the main character has when he goes into these meetings. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's just like wasted film footage to me, seeing these meetings. And yeah, we have another scene that let me see. Yeah, Liam Neeson, his character. This takes place in 1998. And I guess the main point of putting this in 1998 is that cell phones aren't really a huge part of the plot, although they do exist and they are used a few times in the plot. They're not like a big part of it, like a modern film would have. So, 1998, Liam Neeson has shown that he doesn't want to carry a cell phone. He doesn't want to use a cell phone. That's part of his character. Okay, fine. It doesn't tell us exactly why. But he goes to like his apartment somewhere in a building in New York City, and there's this kind of half-assed kid slash junkie type character that's the doorman or the receptionist in this building. I don't get exactly what this process of him being there was. I don't live in New York. I've never lived in one of these places in New York, so I don't know if that was normal to have, like back in the 90s, to have some apartment building where there's a front desk at the bottom and some like idiot is sitting there and he takes messages for you. It felt like something that should be back in a 1950s or 60s film, but in any case, he goes to this apartment building, and from time to time, when he walks in, he checks in with this guy that's sitting there at a desk, and the guy doesn't give a fuck. He's like somebody that really doesn't like his job, and he takes messages for Liam Neeson, and yet he never writes these messages down. He just recalls them half-assed fashion from memory, and that's how Liam Neeson is somehow getting messages. Where I remember back in the 90s, even before I had a cell phone, I had a pager and I had voicemail and I had an answering machine at home. Like almost everybody used to have an answering machine, even with old little micro cassettes in it. And they worked very effectively. That's how we got messages. And yet Liam Neeson doesn't have any of this. He has to have some weird character sitting at a desk in the lobby of his apartment, just kind of half-assed telling him what messages came in, I guess presumably over the phone. It's very strange. And then later on, this kid character that befriends Matt, he has a cell phone. He has like a Motorola StarTAC, which would be in use at the time in 98. And he's able to use a cell phone. And he's just some homeless kid that sleeps in the library, but he has a cell phone and he has cell service and he knows how to use modern technology from the 90s. Better than Neeson does. And Matt, this character Matt, he actually uses this street kid character because he has a cell phone to do some errands for him. And it's very strange. I'm looking at something that the plot doesn't make sense on a lot of levels, and the movie is just like trying to tell us that this is the way things happened in the 90s. Well, I'm sorry, but I was around in the 90s and that's not the way things happened. And I don't know. I guess if you're a millennial, like a really young one, and you weren't around at the time, you would think this is believable, maybe. But to me, it just wasn't. And I was wondering, like, what, at least tell us why his character won't carry a simple cell phone. And also tell us how exactly a homeless kid sleeping in the library and whatnot has a cell phone. Who's billing him? How does he pay the bill? I mean, it doesn't make much sense, but you know, that's not the movie's biggest flaw. The biggest flaw is what I've already said, that it's just an unconvincing suspense thriller of some type. It's very disconnected. 2 stars, November 22nd, 2016. So we're going back more than 3 years in time on this review. The first two-thirds of this film are a drag, terribly dull. It could have been an interesting film if it wasn't too much like an episode of Law and Order. The character TJ is terrible and ruins the film. That's the homeless kid. The third act finally has some interesting elements in it, but at this point, you don't care about anyone past. Well, I'll say at the third act, you're really bombarded with, the 12-step program, and it just takes over the entire third act. Even while you're seeing action scene, this climactic action at the third act of the film, you're just also freeze framing the action to give us 12 steps out of the AA 12-step program. And wow, that's what I got out of the third act. But yeah, the first two-thirds, they do drag out. Like you would think that you're watching kind of like a little bit of a boring mystery, but no, it never goes anywhere, and you're just all over the place. Anytime you get any hint of mystery, it just deflates it all by going to another character's point of view and just ruining all the mystery for you. So I'm not going to entertain those last two reviews. Let's find some real reviews here. I don't consider 4 stars reviews real on this. I just watched this thing like in the last hour, so trust me, 4 stars, it's not. 2 stars, August 9, 2016. It wasn't bad, but too brutal for my taste. Liam Neeson was incredible, though. Yeah, Liam Neeson did a great job. It was very brutal, but all that brutality didn't add up to anything. Like, the very bad guys, the 2 bad guy characters, David Harbour being the most notable among them, they're completely disgusting. You want to see them die, but it doesn't add up to anything. Like, why are they doing all this stuff? We're shown that they're just doing this because somehow they either used to be working for the DEA, or they were informants for the DEA, and they somehow had files from the DEA and were using these to do their dirty business. And we never got an explanation of what the hell was really going on there. And it was a little confusing because at one part in the plot, some actual government agents, like DEA agents, like a whole team of them, they pick up Neeson and they put him in this van and they interrogate him. And you would think you would get some explanation on what the hell's going on, but nope, it just further complicates the story, and you're no better off. You have more questions than answers when you encounter those DEA agents, and the story just forgets about them. Like, after Neeson is kind of dropped off, he's told to get lost, that he doesn't really know anything. The head DEA agent, he just tells all his sidekick characters that, well, this guy doesn't really know anything, get him out of here. And so they kick him out on the street again. And then the movie just forgets that any of that happened. Like, the rest of the movie goes on and you just completely forget about that we even encountered all these DEA agents. Like, how did they figure into the plot? It's never explained. It's just really weird and disjointed. But by that point, I was so overwhelmed with the 12 steps of the AA that I just even forgot to make a note on that weird DEA subplot, because there's just so much stuff going on here with no answer to any of it, and it's so brutal that the brutality overcomes all your questions. I guess just being shocked at all the brutality was supposed to make you forget about all the problems with the plot. I don't know. The director, I don't know. I don't even want to look up who he is, because he just was all over the fucking place on this one. 2.5 stars, good Liam action movie, much better than the latest Taken. Well, yeah, if you're talking about 2015's Taken 3, that's where this reviewer is probably going, because this is a June 2016 review. Yeah, this is certainly better than Taken 3. Taken 3 is just completely dysfunctional. I mean, that had me so disgusted with it that I actually wanted to punish the director. I wanted him hunted down and punished. Really, I did. I got that feeling from Taken 3. This one, I just got the feeling that the director thought it would be cool to just copy paste this right out of the novel without really considering that this was a film and not a novel with all these different chapters. But it didn't make me want to hunt the director down and shoot him or anything. So yeah, it's not quite as bad as Taken 3. 2.5 stars, June 27, 2016. A Walk Among the Tombstones was more of a noir than an action film. Neeson was the only reason to watch this movie. Otherwise, poor writing, acting, full of cliches, and cheap indie lighting. I did like the Black Hole Sun cover at the credits. Otherwise, not worth your while. Rating 5 out of 10. Well, I will say one thing on this movie's behalf. At least it did not use handheld shaky cam. There was no shaky cam. If there was even handheld camera work, I didn't notice it. It had very traditional, steady, well shot, well set up framed shots for everything. I had no problem with that at all. I congratulate this director on not using a lot of handheld shaky cam. In fact, using none that I could detect. Now it's too bad, bringing up Taken 3 again, that all we got was all this crazy Dutch angled shaky cam again. But thank you for not doing that in this film to that director. At least he didn't screw that part up. Now let's see what else is on my list while we still have some time. Yeah, I mentioned the doorman. Weird. I could give a shit less doorman. The doorman character that Neeson was getting messages from. I don't know if that's even accurate to New York in the '90s. It was very strange to me. I've never seen anything like this in the modern day. Yeah, I mentioned it feels like a novel with all these different POV chapters. That it doesn't work in a film. There are too many themes clashing together here. When you're with the homeless teen, you think you're going to see a scene of, a theme of redemption where Liam Neeson and this homeless teen, they're going to redeem themselves together. But it never pays off, but it's in there, and the Alcoholics Anonymous stuff is in there, and the brutal serial killer stuff is in there, and there's kind of a theme about the greed of criminals and stuff that's in there. But none of this goes anywhere. It's all a lot of different stuff clashing together. So your mind is just wondering, what the hell is the point of all this? There's no payoff. You're just watching the credits roll at the end, wondering, what am I supposed to think about all this stuff? It's just bizarre. But yeah, that the big kickoff to the end was, we just had to freeze the action at the end and get every one of the 12 steps from Alcoholics Anonymous. These reviewers didn't mention that. I don't know why, but I'm sorry. But if you need to know all the 12 steps of AA, then you either need to go to a meeting or you need to look that up. I'm sure there's like all kinds of material out there on YouTube for that. But that didn't need to be like shoehorned into this movie. It didn't make anything happen in the plot. It just further confused me what I was supposed to get out of this film. There wasn't a message to it. That's the ironic part. So whoever needed to put all that 12-step stuff into the movie, it didn't add up to any message. They just confused me. So that was a complete fail. So I'm going to call this one, 67% on the tomato meter. Well, maybe the critics just like Liam Neeson a lot, and they were just amazed that they weren't bombarded by handheld shaky cam like all his other stuff recently. 53% on the audience score. That's perfectly fair. It's just, it's not irredeemably bad, but it just leaves you wondering, what the hell was the point of this whole thing? And before I wonder that too much, I'm going to see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.